Welcome to the Political Checkmate, and today I am going to checkmate this video from the Gravel Institute called Is Capitalism Actually Reducing Poverty? With Richard Wolff. So here we go.
Here's something you hear a lot. Say what you will about capitalism, you can't deny it's lifted people out of poverty. I hear that all the time, especially when I'm talking about rising inequality and the vanishing middle class. The rate
I, for one, would argue that inequality has not risen that much in both income and wealth inequality. The reason is because this study in the Journal of Political Economy has found that income inequality has not risen much since the 1960s once you factor in taxes and transfer programs. While for wealth inequality, this study from Yale found that top wealth shares have not changed in 1989 once you account for Social Security. On the claim about the vanishing middle class, it is true that the classes are changing, but it is the other way around because people are actually getting richer. According to the Urban Institute, from 1979 to 2014, more people are going into the upper middle classes, not going down. It makes sense because if you look at the consumption data, as Dartmouth economist Bruce Sacerdote did in this National Bureau of Economic Research study, he found that from 1960 to 2015, consumption went up by 164%. Honestly, if you want some more debuggings of these economic pessimisms towards the American economy, I highly recommend this book, The Myth of American Inequality, for more information. Now then, let's get into the real meat of the video.
of extreme poverty, we are told, have plummeted under global capitalism. We are told that global capitalism has cut poverty by as much as 80 or 90%. This reminds me of my mother. Whenever I ranted about how bad the situation was today, she would tell me how much worse it had been before. Be grateful for the improvements, Richard, she would say. I wasn't convinced then, and I'm not now. These champions of capitalism are slick, I'll give them that, but here's why they're wrong. Their clever math comes from how they define poverty. According to the World Bank, anyone making under $1.90 a day is considered poor. Everyone else is okay. But that number isn't actually based on the living costs of any actual person. It's totally arbitrary. Could you live on $1.90 a day? The United Nations doesn't think so. They say everyone would need at least 4 times that, $7.40 a day, to get the absolute minimum for, quote, basic nutrition and normal human life expectancy, end quote. Using this more realistic number, the number of people in poverty has actually increased over the last 4 decades to a whopping 4.2 billion. Poverty has gone up, not down. But hey, at least the proportion of people in poverty has gone down, they might say. But what's actually the reason for that? Was it really capitalism that was our knight in shining armor?
Okay, so Richard Wolff is being incredibly misleading about the World Bank. The World Bank low poverty rate, which is now $2.15, is simply for low-income countries. The $2.15 would be a big amount for them because of purchasing power there. While for other countries, the World Bank has different estimates. For the lower to middle income countries, the estimate is $3.65. There is the upper to middle income countries, it is the $6.85. So no, the World Bank estimates are not arbitrary. It is just simply a standard of measurements of countries' levels of poverty. Now going to his other point, Wolff is being incredibly misleading because the increases of the amount of people in poverty is simply a population increases from births in third world nations, not people going into poverty. You should also realize that not every country during this time period became more capitalist, since places like in Latin America embraced more left-wing populist regimes like Venezuela or Nicaragua and Bolivia. According to the study from the Journal of Economic Behavior, an organization found that it increased poverty by 20% than where the synthetic counterfactuals were predicting. If we were to look for a good measurement of free markets, which I would argue would be the Economic Freedom Index, which measures 1. Size of government, 2. Legal system, and security of property rights, 3. Sound money, 4. Freedom to trade internationally, and 5. Regulations. This literature review looked at 402 studies using the Economic Freedom Index and found that over two-thirds of the studies found faster growth and better living standards, and less than 4% found bad outcomes such as income inequality. Another literature review of over 200 articles using the Economic Freedom Index got similar results to the previous literature review, such as finding two-thirds of the study finding economic freedom to be associated with good outcomes such as faster economic growth, and only one study found negative results.
As a matter of fact, almost all of that reduction in poverty has been in one country, China, not in the countries where American-style capitalism was exported. China accomplished this with massive government industrial spending and social programs that it calls socialist. With a few exceptions, the rest of the world has seen very little progress in reducing poverty.
Okay, so the reason why there was a massive poverty reduction from China is simply because China has one of the biggest populations in the world and already has high rates of poverty, which currently hovers around the 25% mark from the $6.85 poverty rate. Other countries like America, Japan, and Taiwan already achieved low levels of poverty than China. Now, the reason why China has a decline in poverty is because of capitalism. According to this study from Thomas Piketty, China from 1978 to 2015, the national wealth income ratio increased from 350% in 1978 to 700% in 2015, while the share of public property in national wealth declined from 70% to 30%. And this study from the Journal of Chinese Economic and Business Studies found that it was because of China's private sector it was able to grow, not the public sector.
The pandemic has made years' worth of poverty reduction worthless. 100 million people have fallen right back into extreme poverty. But the problem isn't the viruses. Viruses come and go. The real problem is the system, a system that implodes every 4 to 7 years, pushing more and more people into deep poverty, and which has absolutely no protections for ordinary people when it collapses. Even the defenders of the system have started to admit just how flawed it is. The World Bank itself now says that reducing inequality by just 1% a year would lift more people out of poverty than increasing economic growth by 1% above current forecasts. That's not to say some things haven't got.
The economist Murray Rothbard has responded to this argument about recessions. He has pointed out that recessions are generally caused by the Austrian boom and bust cycle, and before the Federal Reserve was created, recessions were not frequent and lasted for a short period of time, like less than a year. While for people under a free market in a recession, we would simply have mutual aid society to provide aid to people under the recession. Now, with the World Bank, there are not really champions of free markets. They are just random academic scholars from a wide political spectrum. So no, they are not champions of free markets. A real example would be Hans Hermann Hoppe or Walter Block as an actual champions of free markets. All for the claim, I would simply point out that China has increased inequality, but poverty is still declining. Also, the most unequal countries are countries that rank low on the Economic Freedom Index.
Better. But where they are, it's because of ambitious government programs. That's why Cuba, an avowedly socialist country under a decades-long embargo, has a lower rate of infant mortality, a higher life expectancy, and a higher rate of literacy than the much wealthier United States. And that's also why the countries with the lowest poverty are places like Denmark and Finland. It's no mystery. No advanced economy has ever achieved low poverty rates without high levels of government social spending.
Cuba's problems are not because of the blockade, since it only stopped the United States from trading with them. It does not stop other countries from trading with Cuba. It is, in fact, the consensus of economists from this IGM survey that Cuba's problems is because of its own economic policies rather than the blockade. On the Cuba's literacy rates, it already had high levels of literacy before communism, and many other countries in Latin America have had massive increases in literacy, without going the route of Cuba. Also, we don't inherently need the government to increase literacy because it could be done privately, such as Christian missionaries. They have helped increase education in third world countries of Africa because they want people to be able to read the Gospels. Well, for Cuba, healthcare statistics, this study from the Journal on Health Policy and Systems Research found that Cuba's healthcare statistics are misleading, such as using abortions on high-risk pregnancies, and also they have less luxury goods that would kill them, such as lacking cars and fatty foods. I recommend watching this video from one of the researchers explaining his findings of Cuba. Also, this synthetic control analysis of Cuba's infant mortality found that communist revolution made the infant mortality rates worse. On countries with low poverty levels, I would like to talk about Sweden because this study found that Sweden had high levels of intergenerational occupational mobility before the welfare state, and also, according to research by Nimba Sanjay, he found that American Scandinavians have more wealth and less poverty than their northern counterparts. The 4.4 million or so Americans with Swedish origins are considerably richer than average Americans, as are other immigrant groups from Scandinavia. If Americans with Swedish ancestry were to form their own country, their per capita GDP would be $56,900, more than $10,000 above the income of the average American. This also far above Swedish GDP per capita at $36,600. Swedes living in the United States are thus approximately 53% more wealth than Swedes, excluding immigrants in their native country. OECD 2009 U.S. Census database. It should be noted that those Swedes who migrated to the United States predominantly in the 19th century were anything but the elite. Rather, it was often those escaping poverty and famine. A Scandinavian economist once said to Milton Friedman, "In Scandinavia, we have no poverty." Milton Friedman replied, "That's interesting because in America, among Scandinavians, we have no poverty either. Indeed, the poverty rate for America, like Swedish ancestry, is only 6.7%, half the United States average, according to the U.S. Census." I would recommend reading his book, Debunking Utopia, Exposing the Myths of Nordic Socialism. This is the end of the video. Thank you for watching, and please donate to my Patreon so I can make more videos and have your video requests checkmated. And thanks for watching, and have a nice day.